my name's Ben Carpenter, and I can't wait for you to see this week's What Really Matters podcast panel discussion series. Today, it's all about national youth work, and we've got some big hitters from across the country. We've got Leigh Middleton from the MYA, we've got Vanessa Rodgers, we've got John Rose from Wales, we've got Emma Warren, who's an author about a recent book, Big Up the Youth Club. And they talk about a lot of things that I think are going to be really interesting for anyone that is interested in youth and community work and what's going on across the country.
I'm Vanessa Rodgers and I'm a youth worker. I'm a youth work consultant now, but I've worked, as a practitioner, senior manager, currently work for the National Youth Agency as a consultant for them. I'm case lead for Liverpool, Cornwall, Oxfordshire, Islington and Leeds on the local youth transformation and young future hubs. So it's brilliant. It's a really exciting piece of work. Great to be part of it.
Crikey, that's a lot.
I was Bristol as well, but they had to prize it out of my hands.
Well, I'm gutted about that for obvious reasons. Okay, over to you, John.
Qualified as a JNC youth worker in 1980. Had a range of practice sort of jobs, which I have to say I loved. I haven't had a job I've disliked, really. Worked in the city centre in Cardiff on a big council estate to the west. Eventually became the chief exec of the Wales Youth Agency. Did that for a couple of years. I was with the agency for about 14 years. And having retired, I then became the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales Police, which was a big leap, but it was focused particularly on strategies to get young people to live a crime-free life, which is good for everybody, including the young people, obviously. I'm currently an associate lecturer with Cardiff Met University, and I've just retired as an external examiner on the BA and MA Trinity in Carmarthen.
Thanks, Sharon. John. Emma?
I'm an author, so I wrote a book called Up the Youth Club, which is a history of youth work in the UK and Northern Ireland. And actually, John, I relied very heavily on your excellent timeline of youth work in Wales, because very few people actually put those kind of things together. So it's just so important that we lay down the stories and the info
absolutely.
we can.
Yeah.
And I currently work or volunteer, depending on the budget, at a weekly music club in Woolwich in southeast London. So essentially I have a sort of historic overview and a kind of like very, very on the ground, small scale weekly connection to the subject.
Thanks for Sharon. And Leigh?
Yeah, Leigh Middleton, Chief Exec of the National Youth Agency, but I'm a bit like everybody else. I'm a youth worker, fundamentally qualified. I've been working with young people since I was 15. Nearly 50, so a long time, and real pleasure to be here.
Right. Ben, just very quickly, Emma just reminded me, I am actually about 7/8 of the way through writing a history of youth work in Wales.
Ooh,
since
be interesting.
1840. I've got to get my act together really and finish it.
Yeah, brilliant. I've worked a lot in Wales, and particularly around South Wales, which is where I nearly moved to Torfaen on the strength of that, because I fell in love with the place.
Yeah.
So I'll be really interested to read that. Yeah, I suppose I should fess up. I've written at least a couple of books myself. I think it's 20 plus now.
I'm the only one here who hasn't written a book.
I've written
Yeah.
Oh no, my book will be fireworks when it comes out, but it'll come out once I've
the history of the NYA.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Well, I've got
and the development of it.
There's version one of it. But
I'll do it. Commission me to write it. I'd love to. Anyway,
I tell you what is interesting. I thought before
there is a book on the history of the NYA.
Is that of the NYA? Oh wow! I don't think I've ever seen that. I have to have a look.
Tom Wiley wrote it. I said my book will be version 2, volume 2 of this, the next 30 years. So this is the first 30 years.
Definitely. Good old
Looking
Tom.
forward to it. Keeping you guys into 1 hour, I knew was going to be a struggle, but there we go. I mean, let's be honest, you are all legends in your own right, which is exactly why I wanted you to come on. You might shake your head, Vanessa, but you are, and so is everyone else in their own right. So it's exactly why I want to get you guys on board and share some of that experience that you've got and your points of view and opinions. So I'm going to jump straight into the first question. How would you describe the current state of youth work across the UK, and what do you think most policymakers still misunderstand about what youth work
actually is.
I can tell you from my perspective as in this role as case lead, because it's all been about policy and local authorities. I think I think a lot of local authorities don't understand the statutory duty they have, or who is responsible for it, or what actually discharging that means. And that has been quite a lot of our work, has been kind of making sure we speak to the right people and get the right people in the room so that they understand what it is and how it is. The wording of that is still as unhelpful as ever, because it's arguable as to how much is sufficient and all those things, so general stuff. I think that youth work, because there has been targeted youth work for a long time, the money for local youth transformation is all about infrastructure and rebuilding universal and open access, mainly by building partnerships within the voluntary sector, proper partnerships, rather than the council telling people what to do, and young people's voice being heard throughout that. And that in itself is difficult, because people can see youth work now, they see it since the cuts as something that either the voluntary sector does, and they still think it's about ping pong and opening a door and a few activities. And on the other side, they see it as, oh, aren't they the non-qualified social workers who work with the yacht? So, and that's difficult to talk about, well, what's the universal offer? And actually, that's where your statutory duty comes. And you don't have to deliver all of it, but you should at least know what is out there for young people and the benefits to the council of knowing it and presenting that to not just young people, but often they like to talk a lot about parents and communities. And that's a bit of a shift, because youth work was always more about the young people rather than, local authorities wanting you to think about how parents are going to get this information. It's important. I'm not saying parents don't matter, but it's a different thing.
What's your thoughts, John? I can see you itching to jump in. What's the big picture? The big picture is a service that is disparate, disorganized, unsure, poorly resourced, overly dependent on women. And I would say the same thing 30 years ago, and I would say it was overly dependent on men. The youth service is now in Wales almost predominantly women. I taught a class yesterday, 26 people, 24 women, 2 men. And that doesn't give the right sort of balance at community level. So it's nothing to do with gender. It's all to do with balance, I think. The youth service has been ignored, abandoned, periodically resurrected when something happens. One of the forecasts, I think, that has been made recently is, I don't know if you remember the debate in the press, which was talking about banning young people from school was not a good idea. That young people should be kept in school, because if they were thrown out into the street, that's where they'd be. Would probably have little parental control, and that we needed to do something about that. And ever since, I've been waiting for some politician to say, let's employ a youth worker to do it. But let's employ a youth worker to do it at a Tesco hourly rate, not appreciate skills, and just try to calm people down so they can keep people in school, claim their allocation of funding for that pupil until the last minute. So it's in a really tough state. I mean, when the Wales Youth Agency closed down, just a couple of reminders really. When the Wales Youth Agency closed down, I was actually moved from the Wales Youth Agency into Welsh Government, and immediately I had access to all the redacted pieces of information that I couldn't have when I was in the Wales Youth Agency, which is quite interesting. I have photocopied them all, actually. They make a nice insert in my history of youth work. One of the reasons that they closed the Wales Youth Agency down was because it was too focused on youth work. And they wanted a system that actually was more focused on young people. And that was one of their rationales for doing it. That set up a huge, it didn't last long, because that process was just badly thought out, badly executed, had nothing strategic about it at all. It was just, let's close the Wales Youth Agency down, transfer its money into the Welsh government to a new team, which I became part of, who would demonstrate a world-breaking method of demonstrating success for young people out of the school setting. And so they spent about £1 million a year for about 3 years talking gibberish. And we never recovered from that because it just threw the youth service in total confusion, and it still is in that state of confusion.
Thanks, John. Emma, would you like to share a little bit about your thoughts?
I completely recognise what John's saying about actually really how bad things are. And I think one of the best things about the National Youth Strategy is the degree to which it's really, really, really truthful about how bad things are. And I really applaud that honesty, because it could have been easy to have dodged some of that info, and particularly about how bad things are for teenagers in this country. So the strategy doesn't shy away from really showing like how cultural some of the issues are to Englishness or to this part of the country, that our young people are in a worse situation than their peers in other countries. But I'm a kind of like completely unreformed optimist. So what I would say, as well as that, and this is absolutely not denying the harsh realities, is that this feels like a rich moment. It feels like a rich moment for things to happen. Things are already happening, whether or not they make any material difference to my friend Sophie, who runs Woolwich Creative Club, or the person who runs, the Wipers CIC Youth Project, who I wrote about in the introduction to my book, or the Adventure Playgrounds. Whether or not any of that makes any material difference to them is a bit of a moot point, because what I understand from the histories is often when these strategies are generated, that lots of money goes to corporate entities or goes to places where a lot of the money goes on large CEO salaries. And it's almost impossible for those larger organizations to really water the grassroots. So, but saying that, we know that the history of youth work is a patchwork of provision, a patchwork of funders, a patchwork of locality responses to what is needed in each area. And so I kind of feel like this is a rich moment for the patchwork to be maybe made a little bit more coherent or collaborative, and the various actors who are part of this kind of uniquely British entity can maybe start to support each other a little better for a while. So I feel that, so that's that. And just one thing in terms of what people misunderstand, came across this brilliant phrase from an Irish academic called Ruth Griffith recently. Ruth Griffin. And she talked about youth work dealing with complex non-numeric realities. Complex non-numeric realities. If only our politicians could understand what that phrase means, and maybe even invest in longitudinal studies, because if they did that, then we wouldn't be constantly in this loop of like trying to explain why it matters.
I agree with all that. Not that matters, but Leigh, would you like to say a piece?
Yeah, no, I love that phrase, Emma. Thank you. I'm going to write that down because I think it's spot on. I think your question's about the UK. So across the UK, it's just a very different picture actually in the four nations. So Scotland, in some respects, is almost untouched of youth services of old, although they're starting to see cuts creep in and local authority priorities change. And we're quite worried about our colleagues in Scotland and the kind of journey that England went through in the last 15 years ago, or started in that 15 years ago in 2012 and onwards, and maybe a bit before that, right the way through to in Wales, youth work is a statutory title, it's a statutory role. You can't but does that work in terms of registration? John is the absolute guru and expert on all of that. So, but England is the poor relation. I mean, I think across the UK, and that's what I say quite regularly. I mean, just to put it into basics, the Welsh government spends more on support for its youth work than we spend across the whole of England. Scotland spends 3 times the amount on its national agency than England government spends on us. And with us, I mean, regions and everybody else, the infrastructure in England. So, 80% of the youth population is here in England. So, that just tells you what you need to know about political priorities and kind of opportunity to kind of change things. So, but for England, I guess that's where the NYA kicks in. It's a real mixed picture. So it's sort of dying and thriving in equal measure, I often describe. So, we've still got average 9-month funding, which makes employment of youth workers really difficult, which means people are jumping from job to job, which when we're a relational practice profession, you need people who are there permanently, or for the long haul with the young person. So having 9-month funding is just devastating for our sector. There's quite a lot of money, but it's all flowing in tiddly little pots for very short-termist activity, which it's just not what. That's why that statement from Fraser Remember is really valuable, because actually that long-term investment makes a massive difference. I recently said to a group of ministers that the UK government were happy to sign I think it was a 10-year contract to maintain warships, but we won't sign down a 10-year contract with young people to invest in their futures. But if we can do it for warships, we can do it for young people, right? There's nothing. I mean, it's possible. Anything is doable. It's just whether you've got the political will to do it. And I say it's thriving because actually going around the countries, I get the privilege, and I know Vanessa's on the road with us and all the rest of it. There's some amazing stuff going on the ground. What youth work practitioners are doing, the innovation, the changes, the way they're adapting to local situations. And we may not have youth centres like we used to have in the same way. We do have a lot of them still, but they're not often not like they were. But actually, practitioners have modernised and just changed, adapted what they're doing, and they're making it work with young people. And some of the digital online youth work that's going on is absolutely transformational for young people. And don't get me wrong, as a diehard youth worker who loves running youth centres and being in communities on the streets, with young people face to face, I slightly struggle with the online digital space. But for so many, young people today are digital natives. They've grown up with iPads and phones from zero, so that's their normal. And so we have to adapt to go. But youth workers are doing this. They're just transforming and changing and being in those spaces. I should pick up on the National Youth Strategy because it is a moment. It's an absolute moment. It's a hard-won, first time in 20 years in England we have a plan for young people, and it's kind of shameful we haven't had a plan for the last 20 years, but we've got one now. Is it perfect? No, but does it lay out some really good foundations and to make some real changes? Yes. The one challenge is its veins are a bit dry. It doesn't have much money through it. There's still lots of capital money, and we need revenue money to fund salaries and things like that. But what I see the big shift, two big shifts. I see a huge shift in collaboration and people working together. When I got in this job 8 years ago, everyone was fighting like cats and dogs and didn't want to talk to each other and was in competition for every 50p, and it was an absolute nightmare. Now everyone's around the table lining up. How do we work together? How do we collaborate? What can we do? And that's changing the game in terms of not letting ministers get away with things, not letting Treasury run away with things, pulling data together so it's collective. All those sorts of things. That's just shifted dramatically in the last 18 months. But also we've got every minister I've ever worked with in this job has been passionate about young people and wanted to make change. We could never shift the Treasury, number 10, sort of bigger political system and other departments. While the money may not be there in the scale I desperately want to see, the political will is absolutely switched on and it's shifted. And you can do a lot with that. And so I'm very excited for what that brings.
Thanks, Leigh. Yeah. Finishing out with a positive tone, I think is helpful because it does feel like things are starting to turn. Let's hope that amps up a little bit. I'm going to jump straight into the next question. What are the biggest challenges youth workers are facing right now? Funding, workforce burnout, rising need, accountability, and which of these worries you most?
Obviously, we could choose any of these. They're in a way, they're all circling, they're all important, and there are probably other challenges as well. I'm going to talk about training because I saw a post by a youth worker called Fife Irwin, who's an undergraduate at BCU, just talking about how the university department have made a decision to close their youth work and communities, so their JNC degree, and that there are only 7 places left to do this qualification. And I think that's just a huge problem because if you have a national youth strategy which is talking about however many I mean the word obviously is trusted adults, which obviously is for me a bit dangerous because obviously it says in the national youth strategy that a trusted adult might be a teacher who's done a youth work qualification. Obviously that's like, we all know, well, I feel very strongly that that's very much not what's needed. No disrespect to teachers who do an amazing job, but that just strikes me as a kind of unhelpful way of getting to a certain number of trusted adults. Whereas I think we should be talking about professional youth workers who do incredible work. So I think there's a real issue here. And also, Leigh, it was really interesting to hear you talk about the state in the different nations, but obviously in Northern Ireland, the situation is extremely precarious because much like Wales, they have a different relationship to the statutory situation, which, obviously in England is a weak statutory requirement. But in Northern Ireland, people are facing a complete funding cliff edge with a complete lack of clarity about if anyone's going to get any money at all, really. Nobody knows what that's going to be because it's an interim solution. And of course, training over there also is really imperiled. So it comes back to that thing about like paying for capital spend or investing capital spend without investing in the people to actually open the doors. And I think that's best described by the urbanist Jane Jacobs, who described this great unbalance between money for things and money for running things. And money for running things also involves money for training the people to run the things. It's really, really, really important. So it was great to, hear from this student about the impact of this course closing. And it was also useful for me to understand the detail of where these courses still exist and really how outrageously insufficient the landscape is.
Thanks, Emma. Vanessa, do you want to chip in now?
Yeah, I think and I agree with Leigh, there are some amazing projects, and I feel very privileged because I work across all 4 nations. I get to see some really brilliant things, and I'm often asked to train up the staff or to get involved with all that. But working long term, both in Sheffield, first of all, I was deputy head of service for 9 months last year, coming and doing this work with local authorities. It picks up on what John was saying about that distrust. Somebody described it to me as PTSD for a whole profession that has never been able to voice the anger they feel, never been able to share that collective grief, because we're all too scared that our jobs will go or that we won't get that funding, so we'll lose something else. So you shut up. Your default position is very defensive. You immediately start telling people there's nothing wrong and why they should fund this. It pits people against each other when they need to be working in partnerships. And that's been one of the challenges, which is why I think the skills, I qualified as a youth and community worker, and I've always been so proud. I love that community bit. Yeah, for me, that's the key. As a youth worker, I should become part of the fabric of that community. And that community building has been so important in bringing groups together, because it's fine to sit around the table and say, yeah, we want to be part of a partnership. But I've got to go now because I've got to go and write a bid to try and get the funding to keep the lights on after March. Oh, and 2 of the people around the table are going for the same money and only one of us is going to get it. So there's something about acknowledging that grief and giving people, we hear so much about burnout and stress, and it's all true, but where do you go and grieve for the stuff that you lost whilst knowing new stuff is coming? There's also another layer gone onto this now, because while I'm talking to old youth workers, like 2010 youth workers, they are still angry, aggrieved, and tell me a lot about what it did look like, what it needs to look like, what used to happen in those good old days. They weren't that good. I mean, there was good bits and bad bits then as well, because I was there. But I remember that feeling of, oh my God, my job's still going and it's changing. Young people aren't going to get what they need. That's how those targeted teams are feeling. And I think we can't ignore that targeted services, youth workers who have qualified and gone into work at the, specialist adolescent team or whatever it might be within the council, they don't know this glory world of Universal because it didn't exist. It's never existed. And so if we're not careful, they're going to feel the same grief and distrust and fear that they're going to be, suddenly the money won't be there for them and they're going to be stuck out in a community centre. So I think, and probably it's UK Youth and National Youth Agency, there's almost a bit of collective counselling that needs to be done before people can move on, because some of them are just stuck in those places because they've never had anywhere to vent it. And doing a review for the National Youth Agency and getting people in a room and saying, come on, be honest. People are still in tears over what happened 15 years ago.
Yeah, that trauma that people are dealing with in whatever way they're dealing with it. I mean, it's interesting that's particularly the staff and new CEOs and various other people connected with youth work. But young people, I know that, there's lots more that sound like that happen now. I speak to young people regularly. They don't even know what youth work is because they've never had that provision because it's been swept away. So not only do the skills exist in the same way as it did before, because the amount of skilled trained youth workers that were once upon a time serving their communities is, if the spaces aren't there, people won't come. And I agree with Leigh. I think there's lots of really innovative things that are happening now that are changing youth work and the things that young people need based on what they need, which is great. That's part of what we should be doing. But still, the reality is if you don't have the people with the experience, the lived experience and the training and the spaces, where are they going to come to? So it's going to be interesting how this plays out. Leigh, do you want to add a bit?
No, absolutely. I agree with everything that's been said. And it's quite, because we have the youth work, the MWA is stuff full of youth workers. So we have the similar conversations internally about some of those sort of topics. Are the ones you've listed, actually, I'm going to pick my own, if you like, in terms of challenges for youth workers, which for me, it's around professional identity and actually being recognised as a profession and recognised as a professional and having the right parity of esteem with social workers, teachers, whoever else in doctors, nurses, etc. And I think youth workers is devalued, or is sort of and too often just seen as the ping pong pool, leisure club thing that's sort of nice to have, but we don't really need it. It's not really a proper profession because you're just playing. I always say, when I took a minister once to a youth centre, and the youth workers were sitting on the coffee bar, not doing a great deal. But the running of that youth club was exquisite. It was outstanding, because these youth workers have done the hard yards to support these young people to be in charge, take leadership, to run it. They were planning it, organising it, evaluating it. They were working with their peers. They were handling poor behaviour as peers. And we know as professionals that to get to that place is a huge amount of work. And these are really complicated young people with so many needs and other things. And it was helping ministers really understand that this isn't just lazy youth workers sitting on a coffee bar. This is epic. Right, what you're watching is absolutely exquisite, and you should celebrate this from the rooftops. And they did. They absolutely did kind of celebrate that and take that back. But I think that the professional identity of you, I mean, we've touched on it here, the trusted adults objective within the National Youth Strategy. I understand what ministers want to achieve with that. I'm quite nervous about bits of it, because to too many young people, Andrew Tate is their trusted adult, right?
Well, so was Jimmy Savile, I seem to remember.
And so, actually, what do we really define and mean by a trusted adult? And what I think they mean is, when I started as a 15-year-old at a canoe club that was run by Berkshire Youth Service, right? And the canoe instructors were level 3 qualified youth workers. That's who she means. They're meaning sports coaches, arts tutors, people who are in that space, but are given more support and skill to engage young people. We've moved away from your next door neighbour could be your trusted adult, because I sit there going, but your next door neighbour could also be the next Mr. Savile or what have you. You just don't know, right? Unless you're going to do proper checks and balances. But also, where's all the support for these trusted adults? How are we going to put the infrastructure around them? We've won those arguments. We've well and truly won those arguments around putting the structure and professionalism around, I think, the trusted adult model. But I still see, could we not do? I got a call from a sort of head of social services somewhere and said, well, could you come and do a day's training with my social workers and how to be youth workers, so they can use the youth work methodology in youth work in their social work? And I said no, because at least a level 3 qualified youth support worker would have nearly 18 months worth of training and practice and support and supervision and blah blah blah. You can't just do a day's training. I've had the same with police officers. Could you come and train our police officers in an afternoon? I'll come and tell you what youth work is and why you should engage with it, and how to get the maximise your relationship with youth work. I'm not training you to be a youth worker in half a day. It can't be done. And we push back hard on those sorts of things. But I see youth work too regularly being sort of diminished to a leisure, nice to have, rather than a really gritty profession that's really adapting and digging in for young people. And I think some of the changes we're trying to make to the workforce transformation of all the workforce qualifications is to shift this, is to move this through. I don't mind recruiting thousands of arts and sports coaches or what have you into working with young people, because a percentage of those we can encourage onto our level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 courses in the future and be a future pipeline of brilliant practitioners. But they've got to go through the pipeline. They've got to be supported and trained up, and you can't diminish it to the lowest level. Yeah, I'll stop there, but I could say a lot more.
Yeah, no, thanks, Leigh. John, do you want to add your thoughts? I could see you were holding yourself back to chip in.
Just remind me of the question first, please.
So it really is, the main thing is, what are the biggest challenges youth workers are facing right now?
There's so much in that question.
I know.
And I give a couple of broad starts to an attempt to answer. I was very persuaded by Tony Jeffs at a history conference up at Durham University some years ago, when he actually said the tide's never been in for youth work. That we never ever had a golden era. We never ever could look back and say we can use that particular time as a model, perhaps, for bringing it up into contemporary practice. Youth work has always been a struggle, and it's always been short on money, and it's always failed. In my experience, I'm only talking about Wales, although I did work in England for a while, and I said that for a long time. I did try to convince people when I came to Cardiff to work in grassroots that I had an inner city job working in Birmingham. Tough kids, really difficult place. I was actually the youth worker for Stourport, Bewdley and Kidderminster, but I'd never let that on either, really. I think youth work has forgotten its history. I think it's forgotten where it's come from. I think it's forgotten what its principles are and its purpose particularly. I think we've lost that. Because of that, you go back to the introduction of Bernard Davis's History of England, where he says what the consequences of losing that history is. You don't have a shoulder to stand on. You don't have things to look back on, but you can say, somebody tried that and this is the result, or to use that past experience to go forward. I'm in dissertation mode at the moment. I've got a group of students I'm supporting. And one of the things I say every year is you are actually using English or Scottish, particularly English and Scottish authors who are actually giving their view of youth work out of context in Wales, because Wales has been different to England for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, we had that diversion in 2000, Learning and Skills Act. We don't have anybody who is actually writing regularly in Wales about Welsh topics, about what's actually happening. That's a real key challenge. Next week, we have about the 4th or 5th meeting of a research group that's been set up with the purpose of looking at pieces of interesting work, whether they've been written as MA dissertations or whatever, or somebody sat down and said, this is my experience. And we're publishing that on a website that's been held together by Sticking Plaster and Chewing Gum, which is a leftover from the Wales Youth Agency 20 odd years ago, as a means of trying to say to people, where have we come from? What are we about? And how do we make best use of what we know to benefit the lives of young people? I give a couple of examples, really, of what the challenges are. At the turn of this, I get mixed up with dates now, in around 2000, 25 years ago, just as the Welsh Assembly was coming into being, the Welsh Government interviewed 3,000 SMEs, small and medium enterprises, of which that forms the backbone of employment for young people in Wales. Companies employ more than 30 people, and asked them, what do you want? The young people that you employ, what characteristics do you want? 28% said we want academic qualifications, 28%. Youth, the schools this year have a budget of £3.2 billion, 3,200. When I talk to students, I've got the noughts mixed up. 3,200 billion pound goes into formal education. 50 million goes into youth work. 26% of employers want academic qualifications. 88% of employers actually said they wanted young people who could communicate, could work in teams, could actually, those well-known, badly named soft skills, okay? The youth service is not in a position to actually use that information and take it forward, to actually say what we could offer to the political agenda. The research group did something unique. It's taken us 3 years maybe to do it. We expect the Labour Party to lose their first election come May. We are unlikely to have a Labour Party. We are likely to have a Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, closely followed by Reform. And some people would even put Reform possibly. So that's a huge challenge, right? That's a big challenge for us. A delegation from the research group went to meet the nominated education minister for Plaid Cymru, who would be in position of power if he came. And for the first time ever, I think, said to the politician, this is who we are, this is what we do. How can we contribute to your agenda from the position that we hold? How can we do that? That's the first time that's ever happened. We're looking for volunteers at the moment to go and speak to the reform, but nobody wants to do it. But we miss those opportunities, and we've got to create the space to do it. We've also, I hear the word statutory thrown around. We have no doubt at all in Wales that the youth service does not have in the slightest any statutory responsibility at all. The youth service is a maintained service. It is given money. It's unhypothecated. It can be used by local authorities in whichever way they want. They topsize it. Out of 22 local authorities in Wales, the last time I looked, there were 2 local authorities spending more money than they were given by Welsh Government. Most of them top-slice the budgets they were given to use it for other things, other priorities. So when we look at the question that you're raising, it's so fundamental to one issue, and that is that the youth service takes ownership of its occupation and comes together strategically to actually influence the thinking of politicians, because we've patently failed to do that since devolution. And I'll finish with one thing. The first first minister was a youth worker. The first education minister was a youth worker. Since that time, we've had 4 first ministers. The third and most recent youth worker was Mark Drakeford, who actually worked in the voluntary sector for Barnardo's. And all 3 of them have been told, in no uncertain terms, that the reason that they didn't support youth clubs when they were in power is because they obviously didn't understand it. And what could we do to make you understand it? Which was quite offensive to people like Alan Michael, who never believes he's bad at anything, I suppose. And he's an incredibly talented man. Right? He is one of the most talented individuals that I've met. But he has his own views of the world, that's for sure.
It's interesting what you say. I've had so many people saying similar things. We obviously value the impact and the benefits of youth work, and many people do, because we understand it. But it's like a mass marketing piece. How do we get the people that make the decisions at the high end to actually value what we do enough to make it widespread and to make sure it's everywhere it deserves to be?
Can I just add one sentence? Sorry.
Yeah.
Very quickly. The Welsh Government has actually funded a voluntary organisation to do a piece of research into the maintained and voluntary sector in Wales, asking the question, do you think that the youth service should be a statutory service? In general, I think the answer is no, that what you have to pay for that status isn't worth what you get. But they wanted to do a survey. The survey question, the first question was name, and then it was, do you work in the statutory youth service or the voluntary youth service? And they actually used the term statutory youth service in a questionnaire that was asking whether, in fact, we wanted to become a statutory youth service. And that level of ignorance and that level of incompetence in some ways is just really difficult to overcome, because people are asked to do things that are totally outside their pay grade sometimes.
I'm gonna, because I suspect, and Emma, I know you're gonna chip in. If I jump into the next question, and I suspect what you're going to say will probably feed into that. If not, then maybe we'll bring that up again afterwards, if that's okay. Just because I know time's ticking. So what comes next? Looking ahead 10 years, do you feel hopeful or concerned about the future of youth work in the UK? And what needs to change now to make sure it survives and thrives? And this is probably, Emma, this probably will fit in, I would guess.
Sure. I mean, it's funny because I feel like I have 2 very specific sets of experience. One, having written this history of youth work in the UK and Northern Ireland over 150 years, but which purposefully finishes in 2010. So the book ends at the period of austerity, because that's a whole other book, and I already covered a huge amount. So, and also because I wanted the reader to understand how much had happened, how much powerful, incredible work, a form of infrastructure, infra meaning underneath, that sat underneath so much culture, society, economies, these intersecting ecosystems, essentially what a powerful but invisible thing it was. And then to see the kind of like the willful dereliction of austerity, and then just to come over with that feeling of like, how could we have let this happen, and who is going to restore what is needed now? So I did that intentionally. And then also, like I say, I worked on a youth project for 10 years as an editorial mentor magazine run by young people in Brixton, and now I work 1 day a week on this youth music project. So I'm not part of the current ecosystem in many ways. So for me to answer that question is maybe a bit outside of my area. However, since my book came out, I have been familiarizing myself with where things are now. I'm doing deep reads of the National Youth Strategy and all the research that sits underneath it. I'm reading Youth Endowment Fund research and the stuff that sits behind it, and I'm familiarizing myself with it. So I'm saying that because all of our perspectives are inevitably informed by what we know and what we don't know. And so I'm saying that as a way of trying to caveat what I'm bringing to this conversation. So I think I would say two things. It's always been difficult. It always appears like it will be difficult. And that might be to do with the cultural and economic reasons that sit behind the existence of youth work in this country in the first place, which is a more extreme wealth disparity than in any neighbouring countries. That's why it exists here. That's why it's uniquely British, because of the enduring wealth disparities, or the enduring extremity of wealth disparity in these countries. And of course, now we're at a moment of extreme and growing wealth inequality. And so the youth work exists now for the same reason it existed before. The obvious solutions to the problem, which are obvious, the need for it to become statutory, blah, 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 are never going to happen because of the wealth inequality that sits underneath it. And of course, many people with structural power never went to youth club. They don't know it on a felt level. They have to get to know. And getting to know also means understanding something about perhaps why they're successful and some of their peers aren't. The sort of invisible jetpack that perhaps like class or other forms of unmarginalization or unminoritization allow you. So this brings me back to the subject of storytelling. Now, I wrote my book feeling very responsible for the work, personally and just across time and space. And I was very careful about how I approached it. And since it came out, a lot of people have been in touch to tell me that my book has validated their work. So I hope that my book is just the beginning of more of the same of this. Obviously, we have histories and stories told within the sector, but I was trying to tell the stories outwards to people who don't know. So I'm now talking to lots of different people about how can this be done on a smaller level? How can we be making pamphlets? How can we be making small print publications? How can we be telling the story across lots of different formats in a way that allows the people who don't know to get to know? Whether that's youth workers, making like a contemporary version of something from the far olden days, like Mark Smith's Creators, Not Consumers, and feeling freer to speak about their work. Because Leigh, you talked about, wanting to write a book, but you need to leave your job beforehand. I think a lot of people are afraid of speaking the truth about their work because they think it's somehow going to look unprofessional or somehow going to look unsafe. But that in itself needs a story. That in itself needs explaining. And I was just one more thing I'll say is I was very struck when I interviewed Carmen Villa from the Institute of Fiscal Studies about her research, which proved that as you know, closing youth clubs had a huge economic cost. I was not expecting the Institute of Fiscal Studies to be a friend of the youth club, but they are.
They are.
And when I interviewed her about her research, she told me that she got 0% of her data from youth workers. Nobody would engage with her. Nobody would reply to her. Nobody would give her any data. She got 100% of her data from the police, and they had a lot. Now, there's a huge amount in there. I'm definitely not saying that I think youth workers should have given her the data, or even that I believe they should have even collected data in the first place, because that also disrupts relationship. But what I'm saying is there's a huge amount of storytelling which people are keeping within, sometimes for good reason, and maybe there are safe ways that some of those stories that could be told in service of the youth service or in service of the youth work. So I think that's how I would attempt to offer something of an answer to that question.
Ben, if I could jump in.
Yes.
because I have your book. I have read your
Yeah.
book, and I'm not here to sell it for you, but I would encourage others to take a read of it, because it's a fascinating and really insightful read. So yeah.
Thank you.
Leigh, do you want to? I mean, I'm reading it at the moment, by the way, and yeah, and I think it's good. And when I done my degree, I read much of Vanessa's, and the point is that these experiences need to be told. This is part of the reason for the podcast. At the end of the day, if we can't learn from what's gone before, that what informs could be better in the future, then what are we doing? We're sleepwalking. So it is great that there's now kind of next generations of those books which have got those stories again and different stories. But is stories enough to help change the future and how youth could look for young people in a way that they want and need? I don't know. I put that out there. But yeah, Leigh, would you like to add your thoughts?
That's another long rabbit hole to go down. I mean, stories are massively important, right? And we are human beings. We thrive on human connection. We thrive on, this is why the pandemic was so devastating for young people and society as a whole, because it took away our connections, and those connections are visceral. They are what we are. They're at a sort of cellular level. It's how we connect and engage and share and disagree agreeably or whatever. But so I think those stories are vital. What I hear on repeat every day is data, give me the data, show me the data. But the last 3 decisions I've seen from ministers that relate to areas I'm interested in, that it's completely ignored the data and decided what they think they know best because they're a minister. And I'm the elected official. I'll make my own judgment. Thanks. You go, okay, but okay, you're changing this thing because you decided to change it, but the data says you really shouldn't. And so I'm a skeptic. So whilst I think we need better data and we need to work collectively to pull that together, and it absolutely has its place and it makes a big difference. And I can give you examples of that. We did a lot of work in Blackpool, for example, and we funded work in Blackpool, and we did loads of work with young people, looking at their stories, telling their stories, looking at the data. And Blackpool is relatively well understood. It's the most deprived town in the country. All the sort of issues and needs that Blackpool have got. But by being able to pull that data together and tell the story of that data made the difference. I don't think the numbers on a graph made the difference, but telling the story of that through young people's lenses was really powerful. And now Blackpool is investing more and more money in youth work. And Blackpool's quite interesting for me because the chief exec said, well, I made the decision to close the youth service because it wasn't achieving anything. It couldn't tell me what it was doing. It couldn't tell me what difference it was making. It was only after it was gone you could see the numbers of children in the social care system go up. You could see the number of first-time entrants, A&E entrances, and all the data was going the wrong way for young people. When you can correlate that with that narrative, you make a difference. That would be my thoughts around storytelling and data. You need both, but I think stories are probably the right place to start and tell those. But actually empower young people to tell their own stories in a safe, effective way. So the thing I think is quite interesting around some of this is how we empower young people to drive the change that they need to see for the future. So for the future, I'm still this kind of optimist and this sort of nervous wreck, I guess, because for a number of reasons. I think the national youth strategy is a moment. It's a 10-year plan, but it could die if there's a change of government in 3 years' time, and that's quite possible as the stuff stands. So we've got to absolutely maximise this moment, and a few of us have talked about it's a moment. Grab that moment with full force and maximise that benefit. Use that to tell our story, to change minds, to elevate things to a level that we can then continue to sort of grow, defend, celebrate, transform, nurture, whatever whatever adjective you want to use around that, and we can do that. And that's what youth work is brilliant at. That's why I went back at the beginning. that innovation, as well as just doing the day-to-day running a youth club, is really, really valuable, right? Because providing young people with their I'm interested in trusted adult stuff because only 1 in 5 young people say they have a trusted adult, which is devastating, right? I mean, of certain groups of young people. So we've got to make sure every young person has access to a youth worker or the right person to support them effectively and do that. The reason I'm nervous and a bit of a wreck is because, well, John's touched on this for Wales, right? And the Welsh elections, I get polling. There could be a reform minority government in Wales. There could be a reform government in England. You've got the Greens. I mean, look at the Denton and Gorton and Denton by-election just last week, which is, I'm not sure that's indicative of what the future will look like, but you've got the sort of far left, far right, further left, further right. I don't like this or the language of far left, far right, but you've got those further extremes of societal thinking, and then everything in the middle. Where does that all sit and how's that all come? But where do we get? Where does that take us? So I am engaging with reform. I've been and met them. I went to their party conference because I think we have to. We have to go in and have that dialogue. We have to go and understand. One chunk of reform really wants to invest in youth work because it's really about, if you really think about where the movement of some of their movement has come from, some of that working class, local frustration left behind communities, particularly around maybe men and boys. That's a very loud narrative within that space. And whether you think that's fair or accurate in different degrees, fine. But, that's their narrative. That's where their frustration sits. That's where that visceral community feeling ignored sits. But they do see youth work, I think, as quite an opportunity to invest in that and change that. And quite a lot of those members did go to youth clubs, did go to boys and girls clubs or what have you, and kind of get it, right? So that's quite interesting. It may have quite an interesting take on it that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, but it's you can work with that. You've got the other side of that, which is probably more what the Conservatives and maybe the coalition government did, which is ping pong and pool, and it's we've got our tax is too high, we've got to cut money out of the system. Youth work will just be an unfortunate soul in that journey, and that's brutally unacceptable and undermining. So I'm sort of nervous. I also, and we're doing some work here thinking what's the next 5, 10 and 20 years ahead for us. Look at the global economy. Emma's talked about wealth imbalance in the country, but I'm also interested in global conflict that seems to be coming closer to our front doors. And how far away is World War III, and what does that mean for young people and youth services, and lots of stuff in that space that we've got to think about now to know what we would do and respond, and how we would engineer and gear things up for the future. So yeah, so there's loads of innovation, there's loads of amazing stuff going on. Youth workers are the most incredible profession that I'm so proud to be part of, and it's been my whole life, my whole adult life at least. And I know that will continue to thrive, but not at the scale young people need it to. But I'm nervous on the other side that there are so many sort of other geopolitical things that we can't control, but could blow us sideways again. And I'll go back to Vanessa's kind of point earlier on around practitioners and workers not feeling heard and not feeling they've had the opportunity to sort of vent their trauma. I think it is trauma. I think that's exactly the word we use here. It is the trauma of that. But we're far from out of the woods. The number one thing I was at we've been shows at the moment going around the country with UK Youth, regional youth work units, and DCMS around the National Youth Strategy. And the number one thing I heard since the National Youth Strategy's come out, we're saved, youth work's back, and the money's, because the government's made quite a good story about its investment. We're spending 500 million youth work. Well, so with the previous government, they were spending exactly the same amount of money. There's no new money really. There may be a few tens of millions, but we're not talking the billions that we need. And youth workers like, finally the help is coming over the hill. And I'm like, I don't see it, folks. I don't see the knight in shining armor coming over the hill to rescue us. We've still got to do the work. We've still got to keep fighting. We've still got to keep pushing. What is there is that, as I said before, is the political will, but the resources aren't there, and it's the resources that will make the difference as well.
Actually, there was lots in that, and to be honest, we obviously could talk a lot more about a lot of these things. But
if people want to, you and I went through this when we did our podcast, so maybe people should go back and listen to that previous podcast.
Ben, could I just say one thing very quickly when my comment about reform, about wanting to go meet reform as a youth service. The big challenge that we've got is a reform in Wales as a developing political party. There are 96 seats up for grabs. And I don't know how many reform people have actually been allocated into those seats yet. So it's very much a developing. So actually, we'd have to find somebody who would have responsibility for this area of work, which they don't seem to be ready at the moment. So it isn't, it is a real understanding that whatever political party it is, we, as a youth service, we need to speak to them.
Exactly, but I think Leigh said something that really hit the nail on the head for me. I know there's staff that work for us that probably will lean towards that, and it's because lots of working class voters are completely disenfranchised of what their lot has been for God knows how long, and they are exactly the people that would have felt the benefits of youth work when growing up, when it was there. So it's like, we've got to open our eyes. I know, I would guess probably where everyone's colours are pinned on the mast here, and we probably would, share most of that, I would guess. But you're right, Leigh. There's going to be a lot of people that would have felt the impact, and who knows comes next.
I've got people telling me I shouldn't go and engage. It's wrong
Well,
to.
that's
You know, you'll give them
crazy, isn't it?
you give legitimacy by engaging, right? I mean, that's
Everyone's
that's
got
a narrative.
opinions, haven't
But
they? And
we will engage with it. We're an apolitical organisation. We've engaged with all parties of all colours. We also engage overseas, Europe, across Commonwealth, and in Scotland and others, because you have to. You really have to understand the full dynamics of the whole country and lead in on that.
I agree with you.
Everyone's
Totally.
opinion matters, doesn't it? I mean, let me try and kind of align this back into, if I go to John first and go to Vanessa. What
I'm really
comes
sorry.
next?
I'm going to have to go short because it is 11:05 now, and I know it's an hour, but I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm just warning you before we move on to the next bit. I need to be gone by 11:15.
No problem. Do you want to chip in straight away, Vanessa, about what comes next?
No, what comes next? One thing I would say is that it chimes a little bit with what Emma said and what other people have said, and that is good youth work looks easy, all right? From the outside, it looks like it all just happened. But it's only when you know that it happened because of it's been planned for, they understood the needs, young people were listened to, and actually the amount of work that goes behind it. So people think they see what youth work does and think, well, I could do that. And they probably can. Some people are really good communicators. There's always been people who talk to young people well and people who don't. So you can replicate that bit as your trusted adult. What you can't actually do is support and develop young people to actually move on, to learn new skills, to explore who they are, have those political conversations and politicise young people, which for me, youth work's really important in politicising young people because it is not their fault. They just don't know how to do that bit. So for me, that trusted adult is not enough. It needs to have those professional ethics behind it, the knowledge and understanding and skills. And we need to be finding a pathway where our youth workers tomorrow. I was the youngest youth worker in Hertfordshire when I started. I've practically done my time. Another 10 years, I can't do much more than that probably. Where's the ones behind? And that's what we need, is to make those pathways, because organisations that have only got 9 months funding, going back to what Leigh said, your choice is, yeah, I can release that person to go to college or go and do their course, but we can't have the youth work the club that night. Or we can't do that because I've only got enough money to pay them for one. So what we're trying to look at in the local authorities I'm supporting is, can we find creative ways to enable people to access the opportunities that are out there? Because if we really say we want to develop the workforce, we have to understand the needs and what's holding people back and then find ways. Because equally, if I was a teenager going to look at, I didn't first choose to be a youth worker because I didn't know what they were. I'm not sure I would now. I take what you say, that young people don't know what it is. Would I want a £44,000 debt for going to one of the few unis left, or whatever that is, with my student loan, for a place that I don't know if I would ever get a job in it, because I don't even know if there's a youth service left?
Or get paid more at Tesco's. What I'm going to do, I'm going to jump straight in to the final question, because it's Catherine, the young person's question, and this is important to me to make sure her voice is heard. And John, we'll go straight to you with that question. So I'm going to play it. She sent the question in. Hopefully you can hear it.
No, we can't, but we can read it.
We've read it, so we've got it.
Shaping youth work priorities nationally and locally.
Okay, you couldn't hear it. How are young people involved in shaping youth work priorities nationally and locally? John.
There's a variety of systems, and there's been a variety of systems in Wales for some time. I mean, there have been youth work councils at sort of club level, at local authority level, and national level. And that actually is quite a coherent system. I don't know how well it works. And it always seems to me that if I was 15 and somebody asked me to be on a committee, I probably would say no. So the problem is it attracts a particular type of young person with a particular type of view of the world, I suppose, which includes, I don't know, having something to add to your CV if you want to go to Bath University or something. And I don't want to be critical of it. I think, you know, there are opportunities for young people to voice their concerns, their ambitions. Okay. What's the important bit in that are receptive adults, people who actually listen to that. Because I think, you know, from from a youth club experience that are constantly young people saying things that they would like to do and all the rest of it. I mean, the best example for me is a young man, Mark Wood, his name is. He's 40s now, I suppose, married, a couple of children, lives down in Dorset somewhere. Come into youth club on a Friday night and said, I saw a program yesterday which was about Istanbul's market, which looked really interesting. Why don't we go and have a look at it? So that comment actually set us off on an overland trip from Cardiff to Istanbul to have a look at the market. And so it's about being responsive to things, isn't it? And trying to people are committed, focused, and they want things to say. But young people generally don't have that many opportunities to demonstrate their individuality or to demonstrate the things that lurk beneath the surface in terms of ambition or aspiration. We constantly have to work at that. Constantly.
Thanks, John. I'm going to go to Vanessa now, if you'd like to.
So, something I've liked about this local youth transformation money and the hubs is that one of the golden threads that runs through them is about youth voice. Do I think they understood what it meant when they put it in there? Not necessarily, but that's okay, because you can educate up and down at the same time. So for me, a bit like John was saying, the shiny kids, as we call them, I love them. They have the right to have their voices heard, and they always will. But what about those young people that don't? So part of the work I've been doing with the local authorities I'm working with is talking to them about whatever they put in. If they're quite fond of the Lundy model, great. And as the local authority, they probably are the people that can make some real changes. So getting their voice heard up at the top, they do have real power in terms of children's services. Great. But let's not shy away from the fact that not everybody's going to want to be on a committee. And can we look at like a step structure so that young people can engage? If that's on your phone and I'm asked, do I want a youth club in my area? Yes or no? And I've pressed yes because I do. That's as far as I wanted to engage. I'm happy you've heard, but I need to know you've heard me. So can you please come back to me and tell me what happened? And if we're not getting a youth club, why not? Because there's a lot of asking and not a lot of giving back. So I think it's completing that circle so that we're not just wheeling out shiny kids to give a lovely speech and everybody in the council claps and says, oh, haven't we done well? We are young person led, I've been told on so many occasions. No, you ain't. So let's write in different ways that people can participate. And then let's just be proud of that and say, look, you can participate. We do this, we do that, we do this. What we do guarantee is if somebody opens their mouth and says something, we will go back and we'll tell them what happened so that they realise there is a benefit to it or not. So I think there is a move to it. I think if we're not careful, it'll get hijacked. People are already arguing, spending the time arguing over the model that they use. And that's just talk to the young people. Do you know what I mean? Just get it done. We need to show some outcomes. We can learn from stuff in the past. And again, that's back to what John said and Emma said. You know, we have got some knowledge of this. Let's not sit around pontificating over the semantics. Let's just do some things and let young people see that they can make a change or be included.
Yeah. Otherwise, why would they?
Well, I wouldn't.
And let's be honest, if you're a youth worker and you can build relationships with young people in whatever situation and the right environment is created, the young people will talk. They will share their stories.
Absolutely.
They will give their views. So the question isn't about what young people are doing, it's about what is actually being provided as the vessel for them to actually have their voice heard.
I agree, but also I think as professionals, and Leigh, this is probably you have to do this bit, we have to make it absolutely clear. You might not like what they say.
Totally right.
Oh, but otherwise we're not willing to learn, are we? If we're not letting them actually, otherwise it's a tokenistic gesture. Don't get me on my course.
Because they only want to seem to hear from young people if they say what they want to hear. And sometimes it's not very flattering. And you might not like the truth of somebody's reality. And we can't just portion that, oh, that's their lived experience. So no, that's the lived experience of many kids.
Ben, I can build on that if you want. So the way we go about this, which is what Vanessa's sort of been touching on, is 40% of the headcount at the NYA today are young people who we employ to be young people. And they have a sort of a respect internally of, as I always describe, they have PhD level expertise in their lived experience, in their community, their topic, whatever their passion, their interests are. So I've seen it all from boards and so young trustees, and they get bored stiff looking at the accounts because they don't understand it and no one explains it. And, so we've moved to a model where, we employ young people, and that's everything from 6 hours a week to 20 hours a week. And we have groups of young consultants. And I employ youth workers. I have a team of 7 youth workers at the NYA who support the youth voice and engagement activity across the country. So that's UK Youth Parliament, Youth Council UK, and our own activity. But to put that into context, we run one of the programs that I'm really proud of is a peer review program, which is the work that Vanessa's working on. That's Vanessa's on version 3 probably of some of that thinking. But peer reviews happen all over the country. So you get, a couple of heads of youth services from other councils or other areas, or CEO of voluntary youth charity or youth worker practitioner, with a couple of NYA colleagues and a couple of our young assessors. And our young assessors come from all walks of life, and we invest in time and energy in finding people who've got care experience, SEN, homelessness, whatever. And we support these young people. We give them the skills. And I went to the pilot of the peer review program with 2 young people. And it's the only peer review program, publicly funded peer review program in the country that has young people as equals, as assessors. And my job was to support them to go and talk to the chief exec and the leader of this council that we were visiting for 4 days. And the 2 young people, after 2 days of running around, saw lots of young people in youth clubs and projects across this place, turned around and said, "I don't know how you sleep at night knowing you've failed young people so badly." And it was such a powerful message from a young person to this sort of fairly leaders of councils. They come with a certain type, right? I mean, they're lovely people and they work really hard and they're very passionate about their place usually, but they had made these decisions years ago to close their youth service. And these are 2 young people who we've supported and empowered, who'd gone and spoken to their peers, who turned up and gone, "I don't know how you sleep at night because, you're missing this, this, and this. You're not providing these services of support. These young people feel abandoned. They don't feel part of their community because you're not listening to them. You're not engaging them. You're not providing support or services for them." And it was brutal. I mean, it was so brutal, but really done professionally and really balanced and backed up. And that led to a good hour-long conversation. I just sat there and watched and sort of facilitated, asked a few questions. But that local authority is now investing £3 million a year in youth work because of that moment. So, what we try and do here and how young people are shaping and designing the future of the youth work infrastructure from an NYA and sort of governmental perspective, where we get to influence, but also our programs or activities. So we employ young people to come and do it with us. We employ young people as experts to co-design and shape it. And I think Vanessa's last point she made was really valuable. Sometimes they turn up with stuff that's really uncomfortable. And whether it's that leader of the council, me as the chief exec, I met a young person last night on a program we ran that we did not do a particularly good job on, right? We let that young person down. And the chief exec turned up to apologise because we should have done better, and I'm sorry. But we'll get it better next time. But we've empowered young people to have that voice, and that's how you shape the future. That's how we're trying to shape that future. I should do a plug, which is we're rebuilding the British Youth Council as the now Youth Council UK. That's got nearly 200 organisations and youth groups signed up to it. Represents 7.6 million young people, those organisations across the country. It's amazing. So, there is a way in which people can get involved, get support and advice to do this stuff better. And that is everything from youth councils. Yes, might be full of, when I was head of a youth service, every head boy and head girl of every secondary school was put on the youth council. So it had a certain lens, right, to life. And I was like, well, what about the young people I'm worried about on the housing estates that are not accessing this, who don't even go to school? How do they get their voices heard? So everything from that right the way through to, the way maybe we're doing it and others are doing it in terms of taking young people with real lived experience and empowering them to amplify that into decision-making spaces. Some of our young assessors get to come to meet ministers with me, get to come and see MPs, get to, and I literally don't have to do the work, because let them tell their story. Going back to Emma's storytelling, let them tell their story, let them tell what they need to happen. And it's so powerful.
Thanks, Leigh. It's interesting, isn't it? Everything that's been said there. I guess the big part is for those young people who wouldn't normally engage in youth provisions with youth workers, those things don't exist necessarily in their locality, or they're not of interest, is we need to have the stepping stones to exactly what you're talking about. Because let's be honest, no one's just going to rock up to that amazing opportunity without the work before. And that's what we need to happen. But Emma, last words from you.
Okay, I'm
No
going to answer this very
pressure.
quickly because I know that time is tight, and I'm going to answer it by quoting from the National Youth Strategy, but the teenage version, as a way of articulating some of my concerns about the way that youth voice can be performative, echoing, you know, what Vanessa's saying so brilliantly, and also acknowledging the brilliant work that is going on the ground. And that's that in the National Youth Research Project Young People's Report, Deliver You, it says, more than access, young people told us they want to shape and lead what goes on in their communities. And when I made my notes on that, I put in brackets, did they? Because my reading of it was young people saying, we want somewhere to go. We want a place to be. And I think really the idea that it's not either or, is it? But if youth voice is being used as a way of saying you don't actually want access to places, I would have a different view. And then the other thing would just be a kind of a more positive request, really, which is water the grassroots, because we all know that on the ground amazing work is happening, often by people who've just clung on by their fingertips. I think of these entities, youth clubs, youth projects, all these schemes as a sort of an endangered species, building based and personal based endangered species, and we should not be allowing any of them to be closed or die off or wither on the vine at this moment, which is a rich moment. And the way that we do that is by watering the grassroots and just really like holding the survivors, because, you know, we all know they've been through a lot. So that's what I'm saying.
For sure.
Great words to finish on. Thanks everyone for coming on today. Vanessa, John and Leigh have got their own individual podcasts as well that people can catch up on if they're interested to find out more. Emma, it'd be great to chat to you another time solo. I guess that's it. There's lots of money out there, isn't there, for buildings and things like that, but let's not create more levels and layers of trauma for these passionate youth workers that then suddenly have to get a bigger cap out to deliver and do the work. Leigh, over to you at government level.
Not much pressure on you.
No.
Not mine.
It's
It's government's duty. It's government's duty, not we do our bit.
Exactly. But yeah, thanks for sharing, everyone. And I look forward to catching up with you all soon.
Yeah,
Okay.
watch
Yeah,
it to
thank
meet you all.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Joe.